So I'm going to make a pass at it and focus on a few things in particular. What I'm thinking about today is this phrase that Joseph Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, uses, the power opposed to death. Reflections on women in relationship to men. So my aim in our time together is to sketch a framework for how women can relate to men. I think there's something for anyone in the room, so listen along and think along with me. I realized that I could give you a long list of specifics, like here's some things you might do in dating, or here's some things you might do in discernment. And I'll do a little bit of that toward the second half. But I decided that to start, it would be most valuable to share with you the orientation that reflects how I approach this question, how I think about this question. My husband, Dr. John Kitch, and I will be on a panel later today. So if you wish I had chosen a different approach, you can just ask questions in that panel. And if you'd like to hear more on other topics or other themes, ask away at that point. For the framework that guides my life, I draw primarily on Joseph Ratzinger, Karol Wojtyła, John Paul II, and a Jewish theorist named Hannah Arendt. So I'm going to take this guiding phrase from Ratzinger, and it's just one line, and we're going to explore that as we go. And then in the second part, I'll draw out implications for how women can relate to men in different domains or different seasons of life. So we'll start with the first part, woman, life, and death. In his book, Daughter Zion, Ratzinger says that woman preserves the mystery of life, the power opposed to death. I'll repeat it. Woman preserves the mystery of life, the power opposed to death. My starting point is that Ratzinger's image of woman can guide us, women, in our relationship to men. And so now I want to say a little bit about each of those terms, woman, life, and death. And this is where it's kind of funny that I'm the person standing here giving this talk, because I have always been allergic to talks about men and women insofar as they're reductive. And when they're reductive, I have not found them resonant. For most of my life, since the time I was little, I have enjoyed playing in the mud, riding in canoes, fixing things, building things. With help from my uncle recently, I fixed our air conditioner temporarily, and I was high for the rest of the night. Like, I love these things that don't always fit with the images of women that you might hear about in a talk like this. Most of my friends in childhood and throughout graduate school have been males. And besides, I resent people telling me how long my skirt should be. I would take a different approach to that conversation. I find stereotypes about what it means to be a woman grating when they're reductive. And the stereotypes reduce women from a full-scale, specifically female expression of humanity down to one dimension that in some way distorts our full humanity. What's more, I was very young when I learned that to be a girl or a woman in our culture and in our world can expose one to extreme violence. All of that to say, I don't put any stock in cliches about being a woman. We need something better than cliches. So I'll share with you a few keys that orient me when I think about what it means to be a woman. For your reading list, Abigail Favale has a new book called The Genesis of Gender, and it's a really impressive intellectual genealogy of gender. But for our purpose here, the key for me is that in a discourse that's very concerned with ideas, Favale returns us to the reality of our incarnate existence. We are embodied, and that matters. We are not mere bodies. We are not souls without bodies. We are embodied souls. And we live with the fall in our bodies and in our relationships. So when we talk about women in relationship to men, that means being mindful along the way of the losses and disappointments that we bear in our bodies and in our relationships, regardless of our state of life. With that background, I want to consider woman as Ratzinger describes her. He says that in the church's prophetic tradition, woman preserves the mystery of life, the power opposed to death. This is the key. Married, single, or consecrated, my specific gift and responsibility, that's two parts, gift and responsibility as a woman, is to preserve the mystery of life, which is the power opposed to death. And that's the image of woman that I want to explore today. But you have also seen this image of woman. Ratzinger points out that the scriptures track this image of woman. Deborah and Judith and Esther preserve the people. Sarah and Hannah and Elizabeth, the barren ones, bring forth life. Isaiah and Luke speak to us of a virgin. Don't let your ears get used to this. A virgin who has a son. The scriptures track this image of a woman who preserves the mystery of life. But what does it mean, the mystery of life? And what does it mean that that's the power that opposes death? Let's explore those next two ideas here. The Jewish theorist Hannah Arendt meditates on the mystery of life. She observes that we are beginners who begin things. Because you were born, everyone in here was born, because you were born, because you have a beginning, you are also capable of beginning things. Because you yourself were an unpredicted start, no one knew who you'd be, right? Sometimes I look at our 6.5-year-old Cecilia Joy, and I'm like, who are you? How did you come to live with us, right? We're discovering that as we go, right? Like, this baby is due January 5th. Who is this kid? Who is this person? Who is this person going to be? You have this beginning, and who are you, and how did you get to live with us? That unpredicted start that you are means that you are also capable of starting unpredicted things. Are you tracking with me on that? Are you okay on that? Okay. Arendt calls this idea natality. You know, like prenatal, postnatal. There's a whole prenatal YouTube channel, right? So natality means birth, nativity. You with me on that? Nativity, natal. And birth brings a beginner who can begin things. So this idea of guarding the mystery of life is not just about biological birth, right? If that were the case, it would be a vocation only for women who are in a state of life vocation who are also fertile and also capable. That would be too narrow a view of what it means to be a woman. And then that wouldn't get us very far in how women relate to men. So what Arendt does is she says that birth brings the beginner who begins things. And we were all born. So that includes all of us. And we're going to get to how it's specific to women. If we embrace the mystery of life, we embrace what political theorists and philosophers call agency, which is simply the idea that I can act. I can do something. We embrace a posture of reverence for humans as humans in our potential and our vulnerability and all of it. When Cecilia Joy came into our world, when this baby comes into our world, our task is just to be open to whoever that person is. When you meet people in your communities, our task is just to be open to who those people are, potential and vulnerability and all. When we preserve the mystery of life, we learn to make room for others in our intimate as well as our broader communities. When we preserve the mystery of life, we make room for new people and new beginnings. If, by contrast, and this is where the death part comes in, if we neglect the mystery of life, we deny our agency. We think, I cannot act. If we neglect the mystery of life, We give up on the gift of our lives and the good that we can do with them. We close ourselves to new people and new beginnings. Okay, so we're thinking about woman, and we started with this idea that it's woman's task to preserve the mystery of life, which is the power that opposes death. And we have from Hannah Arendt that this mystery of life has to do with a beginning that we all have, and it means that we can all act. And we can put these two insights together. In Arendt's account, what is specific to human beings is that we are all beginners who can do something unexpected. In Ratzinger's account, what is specific to women is the power to preserve this mystery of life. And to preserve this mystery of life is woman's gift as well as her responsibility in any state of life. So, our question is, how can women sustain the mystery of life in their relationships with men? For this part, I think the most helpful thing is to give you kind of the ethic, one of the threads of the church's tradition that orients how I approach relationships with men. And then in the last part, part 3, I'll talk about like in marriage, in dating, things like that. So here we go, an approach. The thread of church tradition that I'm pulling on here is called personalist ethics. And you can hear the word person in there. It says when we approach questions of ethics, which are what should I do with the life that I am, when we approach those questions, we start with a reverence for the person, a reverence for the person as someone who is made in the image of God. That language is probably familiar to you. Are you okay with that? Okay. So personalist ethics. I think Ratzinger's image of woman is a powerful match with John Paul II's personalist ethics. And I'm going to put those things together. I'm a teacher. I like 3 steps, so I put them together in 3 steps. Here's how it goes for me. First, a person is a creature who deserves, how would you finish that sentence? Love. A person is a creature who deserves love. What is a person? When I encounter a person, this is an orientation that the church offers us. Approach this creature as a creature who deserves love. Part 2 then is, well, what is love? Which is a good question, right? There's some music from the 80s that's in my head, but I'm going to spare you. I have a microphone, and I'm going to spare you. The church helps us to think about what love is. Ratzinger says, well, as Ratzinger puts it, love says, I want you to be. And I have to tell y'all that when I think about this phrase, we had like a little like Benedictus Ratzinger quotes for the year thing, and Cecilia Joy was brand new, and we lived in this tiny studio apartment in New Jersey, and it was really snowy, and our baby was, I would say one of her primary modes of energy was anger, and she was expressing her displeasure with being out in the world. And I like looked up at this, like, love says, I want you to be, and I looked down at her, and I was like, yes, definitely. Love says, I want you to be. Because I also want someone to look at me that way. And you want someone to look at you that way. Love says, I want you to be. John Paul II says in Love and Responsibility that love seeks the full development of the potential that dwells in a person. I want your full capacity to be you, to be developed. So a person is a creature who deserves love. Love says, I want you to be. And that's bringing us to part 2, which is that I can orient my action in relationship to persons, in relationship to other people. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about rules and people. If you are here on Saturday in football season, I know it's not a home game, but you're probably a conscientious young person. You care about rules and boundaries, yes? Because rules and boundaries and a healthy relationship to those things can keep us out of the ditch. They can help us live our lives well. At the same time, one of the things that John Paul II points out is that a fixation on rules and boundaries can actually take us away from the persons that those rules and boundaries are meant to serve and preserve. So he gives a chastity example. I know chastity is not the main focus of our day, but it's a good example, so it's very resonant for me. He says, when you're thinking about chastity, I will not is not enough, right? You think about chastity, and if your focus is like, I will not do that thing, your fixation is on the rule. Wojtyła says, look at the person. Look at the person and think about their good. I will not is not enough resource for action. That's not enough to move you. But the good of the person in front of you and how you will relate to them, that is far more substantial. That's something you can work with. So part 2 is I can orient my action not just in relationship to rules, but in relationship to the people who are in front of me. Attention to the good of the person in front of me can help me to choose what is good in relation to that person. And then here's the third part of this personalist approach. I am responsible. My fundamental conviction is that God has created me, and that because I'm a woman, he has given me the gift and the responsibility to preserve the mystery of life, and that he counts on me to respond to this gift. That God depends on me, that he calls me. So how will I respond? That's a sketch of the orientation that I think will help us think about specifics of how women relate to men. Are you okay on that framework so far? Are you with me so far? Okay. So what I'll do here is share just brief comments on a few specific contexts out of my personal experience. Here are some things I've learned about how women can sustain life in relationship to men in a few different areas. I'm going to start with one of the most obvious to me, which is work. When women relate to men at work, we can valorize care, attention to people. We can valorize beauty and a whole array of values that get lost in the push for efficiency and efficacy. And don't think of this as a light and fluffy task. It requires fortitude and resolve and people skills. So I've worked at a lot of places that don't have any bereavement leave or parental leave. But people actually do not do so good dealing with death or birth or anything in between without some space away from work. And so I realized that for me, one of my obligations is to try to humanize those places. That my experience as a woman makes me more alert than I might otherwise be, that like, hey, if someone dies, we need a minute, or a few days, or maybe more. And if someone is born, it's hard to skip into work the next day. And that creates in me an obligation not only to see those gaps, but to try to help create policies that humanize and dignify all of us. So that's one example there, work. Friendship. This is a whole topic unto itself. And the first thing to say is that we need each other, that men and women can have friendships. We are sexual creatures. John Paul II knows this, and we know this, and we can attend to it. But the key is that we should not reduce our imagination about relationships between men and women to the sexual dimension. Wojtyła says in Love and Responsibility that if you foreground the sexual dimension, you distort the whole person. And so whether someone else does that to me or whether I do that to myself, it distorts the whole person. What we can say instead is that if you approach another person with reverence for the whole person, it reminds us that we can be friends, that it's not just sexual energy between us, that we actually can be friends. Some other quick notes on friendship. 1, women, having courage to assert yourself in friendships with men can go a long way. 2, mind the gap. There is a maturity gap developmentally between men and women in college. In general, on the whole, y'all like my academic caveats, women are more mature than men during these college years, during these ages, 17 to 24. And that's okay. So what will we do with that? Well, one response that I think is really valuable in my experience is to try to cultivate your sense of joy and playfulness. Like, women tend to be very serious in college, and that's okay. I'm gonna talk about that in a second. But try to cultivate your sense of joy and playfulness. Based on my empirical reports from friends along the way, the more willing I have become over time to have some joy and levity, to develop a sense of humor, the easier it has made my friendships with men. Part 2 of that is don't be afraid to let your seriousness raise the bar. So there's a little bit of both ways in that. Friendship. I have a last thing to say about dating or discerning consecrated life. I have the exact same advice for both of those. And then I'll come to some conclusions. So if you're dating or discerning consecrated life, these are about relationships. First piece is reverence for the other. Approach other persons as specific persons. We all want to be treated with respect as unique persons. So communicate accordingly. Part 2 is be open to the mystery of reality. You may or may not be a good match. You have to find out. That's the hard thing about being human. And if you are a good match, then there's more discernment to do there. But if it becomes evident at any moment that you're not a good match, that's okay. That's part of trying to figure out human relationships. So just try not to be weird about it, right? Are you with me? That's okay. I think we sometimes are like, this couple's married, and it's like, well, it takes a little work to get there and to figure that out. So just know that and just try to act accordingly. Marriage is a whole topic, so we've saved it for later. You can ask us questions about that in the panel. Here are the conclusions. You can commit to generosity, to a way of life that nurtures life. When women act to preserve the mystery of life, we fulfill an essential part of our own dignity, and we create a more humane world for others. It's really important to know that the gifts of women are for everyone. They humanize and ennoble all of us. Women have special care of the mystery that makes us human. And the last thing to say is that this business about preserving the mystery of life, the power that opposes death, this is a human-sized task. This is a task for humans. It is hard because living well is hard. But it is a task that is for you and for me. It is an achievable task. Right before John and I got married, I sat down with one of my friends who was further down the path, and I asked her, what do I need to know? How can I do this? And she gave me advice which I did not like then and do not like now, but it has been 10 years, and it's been really true the whole time. This task, preserving the mystery of life, which is the power that opposes death, requires that we try and fail and try again. It takes virtue and grace, and it is a task for us. Thanks for your time.